This is the 1 to 24 prediction podcast for the Championship 2023-24. God, it's good to be back. I'm Ali Maxwell. He's George Elek.
It's quite scary that way more people listen to this show than any other show we do. So if we say anything stupid, this is the one that everyone hears.
Talk about pressure. George, we've picked the last 4 winners of the Championship in the last 4 years of 1 to 24 podcasts. That's Leeds United, that's Norwich City, that's Fulham, and then Burnley.
And I remember sitting here last year, I was really bullish on Burnley, and you agreed to sacrifice your own pick and let me have it, and how happy you are. And so you've done it again this year.
Well, sometimes when your teammate has what they call in basketball the hot hand, you just give them the ball and let them cook, I guess. I feel like I'm sort of Klay Thompson to your Steph Curry right now. And George, just set the scene for me, Championship-wise. The Premier League has sent us Leicester City, Premier League winners 7 years ago, FA Cup winners 2 years ago. They've also sent us Leeds United, sadly with no El Loco Marcelo Bielsa. Also Southampton are in the Championship for the first time since 2011-2012. And look who that is at the wheel. Russell Martin. What's your Championship overview as we head into the season?
I think the Championship this year looks to be very interesting in terms of the teams that are coming down, who we'll talk about later, who, you know, all three of them 18 months ago had ambitions that were top half Premier League, I would say, rather than to be returning to the Championship, and have all approached or reacted to their relegation in very, very different ways. 3 pretty upwardly mobile teams on first look who come up from League One, coupled with the fact that you're losing Reading, who have been looking like they were going to drop out of the league for some seasons now, getting relegated. Wigan, who had serious off-field issues at the time of relegation. And in Blackpool, a side who it never really felt after their promotion like they were well set to really consolidate their place. So I would say that there's no obvious minnow going into this season in my eyes.
I'm very excited about the manager pool that we have in the Championship. I think, and it's such a tough thing to measure, but I think that the quality of manager in the Championship has risen fairly consistently over the last few years. And I really think there's now a big group of managers, all of whom I think are good things, smart people, good at managing football teams. So that's quite interesting. I also think teams are smarter now. Decision-making at clubs has become a lot better, particularly in the transfer market. It's much rarer now, I think, that you see a Championship club signing a player and you have absolutely no idea what they're doing and you can't work out what on earth their reasoning would be. For me, those are 2 kind of interesting aspects of the league, and I'm pretty up on the Championship as we head into the season, which is just as well because we're an EFL podcast and we do 2 podcasts a week for circa 45 weeks from this point. George, let's start in 24th place. Queen's Park Rangers we've got at the very bottom of our 1 to 24s. Can you begin to explain to me, because I am genuinely incredulous, what on earth have QPR been doing in the last 9 months? How have QPR wet the bed quite so spectacularly? I've just talked about clubs being smarter, and maybe that exacerbates the issues of one club being not very smart. But consider how they started last season. Consider their status as a Championship club this time last year, and consider the pure panic and the mindset heading into this season, which is, oh my, we are in terrible shape. And unfortunately, we agree.
So QPR were last relegated from the Premier League in 2015, and this really surprised me. Since then, they've only finished in the top 10 once in that time. So this has been a long period of underperformance. If you think back under the same ownership group as well, to that Neil Warnock season where they came down from the Premier League and they were the big fish in the Championship and were able to kind of spend their way back to promotion. That hasn't been the case for a long time now. And the good times we've seen at the club in recent seasons has been mainly thanks to the individual quality of certain players. For a couple of years, it was Ebere Eze, who now, is an England international and, in my eyes, one of the most exciting homegrown talents we have going in football right now. Elias Chair for a couple of years, he's still at the club. But then you look at the squad itself and the work that Gareth Ainsworth has to do. Now, Ainsworth, in my mind, and this will not change regardless of what happens at QPR this season, did an absolutely incredible job at Wickham and is clearly very, very good in circumstances. I think if a fan base buys into Wild Thing and the football that he brings to the table, and if he has a group of players who are suited to playing the direct attritional stuff that he brings, then it can work. I expected that we would see wholesale changes to the QPR squad this summer. I thought we'd see loads more in terms of quality out wide, big strikers up top, kind of dispensing with some of the ball players. But instead, Taylor Richards comes in with that deal already agreed before the summer, which means that if you're looking at the pre-season friendlies at least, he's starting Chair, Willock and Richards and basically bypassing them, just hammering the ball over their heads in the hope that they can latch onto the knockdowns or to Lyndon Dykes' flick-ons. Like it doesn't seem to work to me. When you factor in as well that Tony Fernandez, who was their co-owner, has sold all of his shares and left the club, that Les Ferdinand, their director of football for so many years, and I know that a lot of the fan base would question whether he was having a positive impact or not, but he's now moved on as well, seemingly replaced by head of performance, which seems like a very different job. Is this now like Gareth Ainsworth FC as it stands? Like, who is up there calling the shots? If this isn't working, who is there to say to Gareth Ainsworth, you need to do this? If need be, who sacks him? Like, I don't really understand where they are right now, who appoints a successor. It feels really rudderless. And right now, I mean, I know I am fully of the church that says that you cannot read in too much to pre-season friendlies. But you look at the performances that they've put in, an injury to Jimmy Dunn in their final pre-season friendly against Oxford as well. And again, they lost 5-0. A total lack of direction and depth in that team. They just avoided relegation last season, but the downward trajectory from when Beale left has been, I mean, it's basically been like a vertical line. I see no reason right now to see why they will arrest that slide.
How have they turned into the league's underdogs within the space of less than a year? I will never quite understand it. I've started this pod quite angry, which is, I'd say, unusual. Hopefully not a sign of things to come this season. But I'm really angry about Dejphon Chanziri, the owner of Sheffield Wednesday. We've got Wednesday in 23rd. And I got bored of myself over the last 2 years when things were pretty good for Wednesday in League One. I got bored of just mentioning, even in good moments, the fact that I never trust the owner of the football club to be able to not ruin things, essentially, because I felt like he had been clearly the reason for their championship demise, and I felt that their League One success was really in spite of him, or really thanks to him seemingly taking more of a back seat and letting Darren Moore do what he needed to do with a good squad. Darren Moore did what he needed to do and won promotion with Sheffield Wednesday, 96 points up through the playoffs. Darren Moore's not the Sheffield Wednesday manager anymore. You can read a long piece from Dejphon Chanziri on the Sheffield Wednesday website.
I love the idea of a chairman or an owner writing a piece.
He's written an article.
Yep.
And he will be invited to be a guest writer on NTT20.com at some point this season, because he's a compelling writer, and the story that he tells about the departure of Darren Moore comes down to disagreement around contract extensions and staff contracts, and was incredibly amicable and very mutual in the end, and everything's fine and dandy. And he has hired Cisco Munoz, who took Watford from the Championship into the Premier League as their manager this season. They've just started to do a bit of business on top of a squad that I really think needs business. I don't think that Wednesday's squad from League One, as good and as strong as it was for what they needed in League One, is built for the Championship. It's not built for Championship football, and I would have pretty big qualms about their ability to consistently score goals. I would have pretty big qualms about their ability to win midfield battles while including Barry Bannon in that midfield. And because you take the rough with the smooth with Bannon, the rough being that he really doesn't have an impact out of possession at all, the smooth being that he was the best technical player in League One last season, well, that advantage is not quite as strong at Championship level as we saw last time he played here. So your best player, for me, less effective this season. The squad, for me, not quite strong enough as it was. Munoz has managed to add Juan Delgado, Paul Valentin, Ashley Fletcher, and Reece James, who was at the club last year, has joined on a permanent. For me, the squad's not strong enough. Question marks about the manager, and my old mate Dejphon, in my eyes, ruining it.
Is he your old mate?
Sarcasm.
I feel bad about who we have in 22nd, because often when you and I do this, there are teams that you think you have a grasp of. And I kind of thought in my head, like Rotherham, I'm pretty positive about them. I like Matt Taylor. I like what they did in January. They're going to be fine. And then you sit down and you spend half an hour or whatever kind of going through their numbers from last season, the squad, the business they've done. And I was surprised by how negatively I came out of that. And that's why they are where they are. Like, firstly, I think the move of Ogbene to Luton is a really big miss. He's someone who had a lot of goal involvements last season, both in terms of goals and assists, and I think he offers a hell of a lot more than that in terms of the way that Taylor wants his side to play. And right now, it's hard to really make a case for him being replaced. I know that Fred Onyedinma has come in. He's been playing at wing back for the majority of the time at Luton. He's a tidy player and someone who has been okay over the last couple of seasons at the Championship level. I don't think he's someone who's going to go to Rotherham and get a Premier League move off the back of it like Ogbene. Wes Harding moved to Millwall as well. Connor Coventry had a really impressive loan at the back end of last season at Rotherham, and he's also gone. And looking, after Rotherham made some impressive signings in January earlier this year, where it felt like Matt Taylor was getting his players in. Hugo came through the door, Tarek Fosu came through the door as well. The aforementioned Coventry, these were players who immediately came in and improved Rotherham and settled very quickly. I look at the transfers this summer. Cafu coming in from Nottingham Forest, who has barely kicked a ball for the last 18 months, was a pretty surprising one to see coming in.
You'll be careful, mate, because he has done some pre-season bits that's really captured the minds and hearts of the Millers fans.
I can make a list for you every summer of players who have good pre-seasons and show nothing.
Be good content.
Grace on Football's pinned tweet is a sign just saying, do not judge anything on pre-season, which I kind of want to retweet every 10 minutes at the moment. And apart from that, there's kind of no real necessary first-team players. Grant Hall and Dylan Phillips are in. Yeah, it just looks to me to be like a very thin squad. I'm a huge fan of Matt Taylor's. And I think just because of the job that Paul Warner's had done, it's important to remember that, in my mind, with Rotherham, if they manage to finish 21st with this squad, then he has done an incredibly good job, because there is a quality gap in my mind between them and a great deal of the rest of the squads in the league. So they're a club I like. I like the way they go about things. I like their manager. There are players I think are decent. I hope that Hugo has another good season, having had a really good second half of the season. He seems like a good fit for Rotherham. But we have them in 22nd because there are other teams I think that will pick up more points. And that is a view reflected by the Betfair Sportsbook, who have Rotherham as 13-8 favourites for relegation. As I mentioned, QPR 3-1 and Sheffield Wednesday 7-2. So, yes, two fairly big prices there. You can have the treble, which is at 47-1. Us picking the three to go down.
Above the dotted line, Huddersfield Town we've got in 21st position. They had a strong finish to last season to get themselves out of the relegation. And who was at the heart of it? Neil Warnock, the greatest Championship manager in history, came into Huddersfield, kept him up because he guarantees survival.
Probably the best of the lot, I would say, from his great escapes.
He's had some good saviours, I think it's fair to say, Neil Warnock. We should touch on some off-field news. Good news for the club is that a new owner, Kevin Nagel, has bought the club, and that's been ratified over the summer. American owner, he's taken over, hasn't had a huge impact in terms of the transfer market. He's not come in and straight away weighed in and given Warnock a war chest, so to speak.
Worn chest.
But that might be partly, George, because the Huddersfield squad is quite a weird, quite big, quite bloated squad with quite a lot of senior pros already on the books. So I'm not sure there's that many spots for Warnock to add at the moment. And it's not necessarily a squad of players that are particularly highly sought after, because last season, for the most part, was a bit of a shambles. So it's an interesting one, I think, for Huddersfield. I'm interested to know what the narrative will be, what's realistic. The Warnock aura, like how long does that last? He clearly wasn't a long-term option when he was hired, and that was clear. And unsurprisingly, he became the option because that's generally what happens after the great relief of a sort of miracle survival. So Warnock at 74 is pretty exciting. I'm excited for Jack Redoni, who had really came on strong last season. And I guess my positive for Huddersfield is it's difficult to imagine them starting as poorly as they did last season when panic really set in.
Do you want to hear a sporting comparison that I think I'll be the first in the world to make?
Yes, always.
I think Neil Warnock and Ben Stokes have a lot in common.
Okay.
Where, as we all know, there is no better batsman in Test cricket than Ben Stokes when there is a target to be aimed at, especially when it's against all odds. You know, I'm thinking Headingley. I'm thinking Lords Nearly earlier in this.
Lords Nearly.
Earlier this summer. What is it? He averages 20 with the bat in the first innings and over 40 with the bat in the second innings for England. Warnock is exactly that. Like when he comes in to bat, he wants to have a target. He wants to be able to aim at that target, know exactly what it is, and then he can achieve. The more ridiculous that target is, the better he is. However, when he comes in and there's nothing to be aimed at, it's just wafting in the wind early season, then he's out pretty early. And I think that's what we could see here. And with Warnock, I always think, in a similar thing to, Ben Stokes in a half-full arena on 15 off 37 balls with nothing really to go for.
Really stretching it out.
He looks around and he thinks, do I really want to be here? And I think there's a chance that Neil Warnock will look around Huddersfield in November when they are 20th, 19th, and he'll think to himself, can I really be bothered for this? Maybe not.
Back to QPR. Back to Rotherham.
He'll retire first and then we'll see.
Into 20th now, Cardiff City. They finished 21st last season. It was another poor campaign. They have hired in the off-season Errol Bulut, and he's taking charge of a team that will look a little bit different, particularly going forward. Now, Cardiff have signed Aaron Ramsey, which is one of the great romantic signings.
Lovely narratives.
The EFL summer. To be completely honest, I've no idea what Ramsey's exact level is currently, but I am very excited to see if that top level quality shines through. I think there's a good chance that it does. Team here, I think there's a solid 11 here. I think there's a few backup options in midfield and forward areas in particular. I know that with the signings of Carlin Grant and Mate from Reading and Ugbo, the striker, I know that the transfer business has got Cardiff City fans quite excited about the fact, or the potential rather, for them to be better, particularly going forward where they've been really, really poor. I'm a bit concerned about Cardiff City and the direction of the club. There's been a really troubled last few seasons off the field, not just in terms of chopping and changing managers and struggling to find a sort of coherent way of running the football club, the football side of it, but also, of course, a lot of court cases, a lot of disputes, in particular surrounding the transfer and the subsequent death of the late Emiliano Sala. This summer, the club were ordered to pay the remaining balance to Nantes, so around £9 million, and it's a club that's been under sort of restrictions in terms of transfers. And then we come to the manager, Bulut, who could be incredible, may not be incredible. He joins what I think is a really strong core of championship managers, almost all of whom have a very strong grasp on the division already, on English football already, have a strong grasp on how their teams are going to play, and have proven that they can do that. With Bulut, having done a bit of research and asked some people more in the know than me, sounds like a pretty defensive manager, defence first. Is that the best option for Cardiff at this stage? If scrapping for survival is what they're going for, but I think they're trying to aim a little bit bigger. I'm not necessarily convinced that what I've heard about Bulut lends itself to that. And if he doesn't click, if things don't work with him, where do they turn next? It's been a tiring managerial merry-go-round at Cardiff over the last few years, and I personally, essentially all this boils down to, another season of struggle comes down to me not having belief in the people that run the football club. I worry about the decision making and also the financial side of the club. I got Cardiff in 20th.
Next up is Hull, and again, this is another where I was surprised by how, when doing the research, suddenly it dawned on me that actually maybe some positivity that I'd seen doing the rounds, I couldn't really work it out. We know that Ashen Ilashali came in. There was investment in the playing side of things. A lot of those players are still there. I think Jean Serry is still a magnificent operator in the middle of the park. Ozan Tufan possesses quality. Sayed Manesh, when fit, is okay. Oscar Estupiñán at times scored goals last season. But these are all players who've kind of been there now for 18 months and haven't really shown themselves to be the requisite quality to fire Hull into a more of a kind of promotion position. Adding to that, the transfers they've made, I'm not particularly sweet on. Liam Delap comes in. He had 2 separate loan spells last season at championship clubs where in neither he showed himself, in my mind, to be of the requisite quality to lead the line for a championship side. I don't think he's good enough. This is a huge loan for him to show that isn't the case. Aaron Connolly's rumoured to be coming in, who was there on loan last season, who, again, I don't think has shown a great deal at championship level to suggest that these are basically hype players that they're bringing in, to be honest, rather than anyone who's shown a great deal. And the kind of messages coming out of the club are a bit concerning, with Ilachali coming out recently and saying that the club need to cut their cloth accordingly, that they've invested a lot in the playing staff in the last year, and this summer is more about consolidation. In Liam Rosenior, they've got a manager that I want to like, but the underlying numbers, the XG data at the back end of last season dropped off a cliff and were really concerning. They have lost Darlow and Baxter were the 2 keepers who challenged Ingram. So Ingram is number 1 at the moment. There is talk they're trying to bring a keeper in. But this is basically the same team. I think if you are going to have Hull anything better than a lower mid-table side, then you are investing immense faith in Rosenior being really good. And whilst I think he could be, and the way he talks about the game is great, and I'm really rooting for him, got to base his stuff on evidence. And right now I'm not seeing that at all. I think Hull are, we've got them in 19th. I'm a little bit concerned that if things, as we can often see, if the owner isn't willing to put in, after heavy investment and then no investment, I worry that if they're languishing, then it could spell a bit of trouble. I hope I'm wrong, but yeah.
I made a big deal earlier about how I think clubs have become a lot smarter than a lot of the clubs that were operating in the sort of late 2010s when we first started the pod. And then you've got Hull City under Ajun Ilijali, and I think they're basically a sort of 2015 championship club in the sense that he was very rich and made a very big splash when he first came in, and he bought a lot of players, most of whom had either come from or previously played in the Turkish Super League, and built a sort of all-star 11, or at least what I think he had hoped would be an all-star 11. Spent quite a lot of money in the process, and it's a bit like a kid eating tons and tons of sweets and then feeling so sick that they can't eat their actual lunch a bit later on. Now he's like, we can't, what the hell? We got this massive squad, no one wants any of these players, and they haven't had as much of an impact on my team as I thought they would, and I'm literally not allowed to spend much more money. Yeah,
it just feels like a bit of a mess. I'm not seeing what other people are seeing with Hull.
Nor am I, mate. Nor am I. We've got Plymouth Argyle next up. Champions of League One last season with over 100 points made. And you know what, George? I couldn't love what they're doing in the transfer market any more. They've signed Morgan Whittaker, who had an incredible first half of the season. A player that they know exactly what his strengths are, and they have already proven that they can play a certain system that gets the best out of him, unlike some of the other managers that he's had. They've signed Barley Mumba, probably one of our favourite players in the whole EFL.
In the world.
An absolute superstar for them last season. One of the most feared players in League One for what he could do with his dribbling ability, with his ball carrying from wide areas. They've signed him on a permanent from Norwich for a fee that reportedly was actually pretty low compared to what I think we would think his market value would be. They've also signed Gibson to play at the back. Pleguezuelo is one that I'm pretty excited about.
Yep.
Former Liverpool youngster who's been out in Holland for a couple of years. Looks like a really aggressive front foot, ball-playing centre-back, a little undersized, but makes up for it with aggression, we hope. Kane Kessler-Hayden's in on loan, which I know you liked a lot, and Lewis Warrington as well. So I properly love their recruitment. Shock. They've been really good at recruitment for many years now. Because even if it's tough this season, and even if they go down, which clearly there is a chance of that, even if we don't think that they will. They are building transfer assets which could help them in the long term as well. And they're also players that you could see impacting things immediately and makes the team better. And that's what it's all about in their situation. And that's exactly what Sheffield Wednesday are not doing at all, because they don't have the right decision makers in place to do so. I think the thing that's mostly in their favour, Argyle, in my opinion, because there's a chance they may struggle at times this season. But if they do, I don't think there'll be any panicking whatsoever. If things are tough, I think the general culture and mentality of the club is so strong, and I don't see that wobbling at all. I don't think there'll be an itchy trigger finger, let's say. And Schumacher, who's been so great and is so respected, they're not going to just suddenly add 5 more players for the sake of it, wasting money. And I think in terms of a way of surviving in a championship scrap, that's quite a big thing. So I know that they weren't very good defensively last season. They were saved a little by their goalkeeper, Michael Cooper, and Burton did a good job when he came in. If they keep conceding the level of shots, the amount of shots and the quality of shots that they did in League One, that could easily undermine them, because if you can't keep clean sheets or keep goals down, you're going to struggle to rack up points. But I just believe in their development path. I believe in their trajectory. We got Argyle staying up.
Next up is Blackburn Rovers. So this is a prediction of quite a severe drop to 17th place. The EFL hill that I will die on, I mean, there are actually quite a few. It's kind of a range of hills. But one of them is that both Tony Mowbray and then John Dahl-Tomasson last season did very good jobs to have Blackburn Rovers competing to get into the playoffs, even though they inevitably failed to get in all of them. And I understand the frustration within Blackburn and amongst Blackburn fans that they were unable to see out the task every time, having been in such a strong position. But when you look at the squad they had to their hand, when you compared budgets to other teams in the league, it felt to me like it was an overachievement. That just the pathway that it happened in was unfortunate. Now, things are seemingly changing at Blackburn with a lot of rumours in terms of financial issues around the investment of the Venkies. And John Dahl-Tomasson said in an interview during pre-season a week or so ago, it's a totally new situation, a totally unclear situation, and we need to stick together. I signed up for a project, and that project has changed. The goalposts have moved when you change the budgets, and the ambition should also change in that way. For me, we can't keep the fans in the dark, but we must be honest. So quite a clear message there from JDT that in his mind, budgets have changed and therefore expectations have to too. And it's not a surprise when you look at the business that they've done. Ben Brereton-Diaz has moved on. I'm sure many people at the club wish that they'd cashed in when they had the opportunity to a couple of times. In terms of incomings, Niall Ennis comes in, who is a fun option in going forward, but hardly someone who can replace Brereton-Diaz. A couple of players in from the continent in terms of Tronstad and Sigurdsson, who we'll see how they settle. But they need a striker, at least one at the moment. Hopefully we're going to see a breakthrough season for Adam Wharton in centre midfield, who I'm convinced is one of the biggest prospects or brightest prospects we've seen come through the Championship. And I think the way that John Dahl-Tomasson wants his team to play should suit Wharton. But it's very hard to be in any way positive, I think, about their chances to overachieve again. I really hope that whatever is going on isn't going to further damage their chances. I hope that John Dahl-Tomasson does stay at the club. And I hope that the fans heed his advice in terms of just tempering expectation, that this could be a season where even a tilt at the playoffs, the possibility of getting into that equation might be out of reach.
Yeah, it'd be good if all that stuff quietened down and ended up not being a big issue and undermining him, because there was quite a lot to like at the back end of last season. Some incredibly funky in possession attacking play. Looking forward to Joe Rankin Costello being listed as a right back and playing basically false everything. Yeah. Looking forward to Adam Wharton being absolutely unbelievable. Maybe Ty Dolan having a breakout season with the absence of Diaz. And a couple of the signings that are interesting, right? Tronstad and Sigurdsson. And I sort of hope that once the season starts, things settle down and Thomason can kind of do his job without constantly looking over his shoulder and seeming a bit irked. We got Preston North End above them. They finished 12th last season. They got Ryan Lowe in charge. What have they lost this summer? Well, probably the goals of Tom Cannon feels the most important thing, the Everton loanee. He hasn't rejoined a Championship club yet, and Preston no doubt will be going hard for him. At the same time, I like the fact that they aren't pinning everything on getting Cannon back. That's, I think, what they did with Cameron Archer the year before, and they didn't get Archer back, and that was a problem. Here they've signed Mads Frøkjær Jensen, who I'm pretty excited to watch. Don't know a huge amount about, but I'm hoping he's going to be a quality attacking player. I think he has a penchant for a long shot, so I've got sort of Zian Fleming vibes from Frøkjær Jensen. And then under the radar signing, really, Will Keane, I think, is just a really strong pickup for a team in Preston's situation. Every club wants to buy talented young players and sell them on for a profit. But squads are not just made up of those players. And to buy someone with, in my opinion, proven Championship quality, whose big issue in the first part of his career was injuries. He's been fit now for 2-3 years. He's been contributing a lot to Wigan. A quality operator who is decent in the air, very, very smart, good link player, and has an eye for goal as well, and understands how to get into goal-scoring positions and finish as well. So I'm predicting Keane to be a sort of low-key big signing. Then they've got loanees from Liverpool, Calvin Ramsey and Leighton Stewart. Hopefully they'll be, as good as you're going to want your Liverpool loanees to be. And I don't think either of us are hugely concerned about Preston, nor do I think either of us think that there's a chance of them punching their way into the playoffs, let's say. I think the team in the squad is pretty good. Kind of hard to have the wow factor when you can't spend as much as some of the teams around you, but I kind of like what they've done. I guess the big concern, or it's not a big concern, but one of the concerns around Preston is that just isn't a great vibe around the place, to be honest. The fans weren't very entertained last season. Their home form was pretty horrendous. I think feelings towards Ryan Lowe are kind of mixed. And I do think that if there's a really poor start, then again you could start see the atmosphere getting really low. But otherwise, I think all looking fairly solid. We've got Preston there, and just above them, George,
Watford, which I know will be a surprise to many. We've got them in 15th, and I found them one of the hardest teams to really quantify because in Valérien Ismaël they have a manager whose story is hard to really work out. There's no denying the job he did at Barnsley was absolutely incredible to take them to the playoffs, and the style of football was something we'd never really seen before. It earned him the job at the Hawthorns, a recently relegated West Brom, where he was sacked in February when they were 5th. And it's one of those sackings where it wasn't purely performance based, it was partly based on a fan base basically not liking what they were seeing in terms of the football that was on show. We know what we're going to get with Ismaël. We know it's going to be squeeze ball. They're going to press very high up, look to turn the opposition as much as possible, be very direct. It's not going to be pretty on the eye, but I think for the most part, it is fairly effective. However, I'm still not convinced that they necessarily have the squad to do this. They brought in Tom Ince, who, is he a fair replacement for Ismaïla Sarr? I wouldn't say so myself. He's someone who's the best player for Reading over the last 12 months or so. But beyond that, Jamal Lewis at left back is a player that, even when he got the move to Newcastle, we were wondering if he necessarily deserved it. I don't think he's a great left back for the level necessarily. And I'm not seeing a great deal of the kind of athleticism that's needed in order to execute his style. We mentioned Sarr, who's gone. Joao Pedro, of course, having left as well. You've got to ask questions as to whether or not Ismaël's style has been found out a little bit. Now, the interesting thing for me here is, I think the Rob Edwards sacking last season was the moment where Watford fans went from defending their managerial sacking record to really complaining about it. And nothing has changed again. And given the way that we've seen fans respond to Ismaël's style of football, and given the expectations here that Watford fans will have, which is understandably they think their team should be competing for promotion out of the Championship, I think there's a massive disconnect between where this squad is right now and what fans are expecting. And I'd be very surprised if they are fully behind him in weeks or months' time. And inevitably, we know what happens there with Watford. And if they are recruiting, as we think they are, for a certain style of play, although the addition of Jake Livermore is another one which makes me question the level they're recruiting at, then I am concerned. I'm excited to see Reece Healey back in the EFL. He's someone where if things do click at Watford, I can see him scoring a lot of goals.
Absolute gunman.
Yeah. So we'll see. It's just, I sat not in this seat because we're in a different room, but I sat in a seat this time last year, so excited about this brave new dawn for Watford and Rob Edwards. Rob Edwards won a promotion to the Premier League. It wasn't with Watford, and now I've got to see it to believe it, I'm afraid.
Yeah, another team that came down from the Premier League last season, and can I go as far as to say stunk the place out?
Yes.
I think I probably can. Norwich finished 13th last season. We've got them finishing 14th this season. We're not seeing any improvement or progression. They really petered out last season, which is, I'd say, fairly concerning when you make a managerial change because you think someone's massively underperforming where the squad should be. I would suggest that Norwich right now have some of the worst vibes in the 72. You know, outside of those clubs who are sort of suffering from genuine existential threat right now because of horrendous ownership situations. Outside of that, Norwich have got to be among some of the worst vibes just in a footballing sense. Just a huge amount of meh around Carrow Road. A team that got worse as the season went on, even after changing manager. A team that didn't score in the final 5 home games of the season and ended on a run of 1 win in 11 games. That team hasn't changed much in terms of manager, staff personnel, and hasn't, in my opinion, added anything that gets the pulses racing in terms of player recruitment. Ashley Barnes has come in, Shane Duffy, Borja Sainz is in, but he's out till October. Jack Stacey looks like he could be a solid option at right back, particularly if Aarons moves on. And Fasnacht is an attacking midfielder that Wagner knows from his time with Young Boys. They've lost Teemu Pukki, and they've lost Kieran Dowell, who were two probably of their brightest sparks last season in a pretty dark season. I've got some excitement about 2 players in particular. That is Gabriel Sara and Marcelino Núñez, who were bought this time last year from South America. Sara in particular finished the season very strongly and looks like a great goal threat box-to-box midfielder. Núñez probably still finding his feet and his role a little bit more, but looks to have the sort of technical quality that's above the level if he can settle. So I've got high hopes for them. I hope that Adam Eder can step up. I hope that Sargent thrives in a more important role with Pukki gone. I hope that Solis or Rashica or Sainz or Fuajeta or Onel Hernandez or Fasnacht can be excellent, because I think the goalie and the back four look fine if everyone's fit. But I just have zero positive energy about Norwich, and I think you're the same, and that's why we've got them not making any strides on last year. And if Watford and Norwich do both finish in the bottom half 2 years after being Premier League teams, that will have a huge impact on their status in the English game, genuinely, and I'm pretty concerned about both. We've got Swans up above them.
Transition season, this one, isn't it? Really?
Is it?
Yeah.
That's what Barnsley thought when they hired Mike Duff, and he went, I will literally transition my way to the playoff final."
Yeah, the difference here being that they have a squad that have been drilled to play a very specific style of play under Russell Martin, and they've hired a manager in Mike Duff who has shown himself to be fairly malleable when it comes to playing style. You know, the Cheltenham side was pretty direct. The Barnsley side was still direct, but they played through the lines a lot more. They pressed incredibly heavily. And I think what we'll see at Swansea is a retention of a possession style, but done so in a more rock and roll way eventually. But I think that will take time to implement. When you consider the players that they've lost, you know, they've lost Manning, who I think will be a bit of a loss down that left-hand side. Latibodi has been playing fullback for the most part, and I know hasn't been a first choice there, but even so, his departure, his minutes gone. And then obviously Joel Piroe is the big one. Now, having lost Obafemi, who basically they should have let go last summer because he barely played after they rebuffed Burnley's advances. If they lose Piroe as well, then those are the 2 signings that were made a couple of seasons ago when Andy Scott was the head of recruitment for not very much money, who looked to be really promising, who'd have left the club. I love the Jerry Yates signing. I think he kind of embodies what Duff wants out of a striker, where he works very hard. He's got an eye for goal and he can run the channels. He can play in a 2. I think he's perfectly suited for it. I don't think Piroe is. And for that reason, if they're getting anywhere near the kind of bids that we're hearing about for Piroe, I would just cash in and then recruit players that would fit Duff's style of play, because right now it's a very thin squad. They don't have much cover in defence. When you're looking in midfield areas, Grimes is the obvious quality, but I'm not necessarily sure how well he fits into what Duff really wants from his players, although I guess there are kind of similarities in a way with the likes of Herbie Kane and Luca Connell in terms of being a tenacious ball player. But it's not going to be the same, I think, as it was previously, to where everything goes through Grimes throughout the game. Duff said in his press conference when he took the job that he was really important to him that he played the right way. I know Swansea fans, certainly more than any other fans in the EFL, have an expectation that their club will play a certain way. I hope Duff doesn't get too caught up in that and, sticks to his guns a little bit whilst trying to retain possession. I think the Barnsley model moved towards that later on in the campaign as they've got more and more aggressive and attacking. But from here, given the high regard that you and I hold Russell Martin in, obviously I think that Duff is destined for big things, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if this is the first stepping stone for him taking Swansea towards the Premier League. I think it's impossible to sit here now and say, with the players they've lost, that this is an immediate upgrade. And I think another mid-table finish and kind of getting used to what Duff wants is probably more likely to be on the cards. Next up, above them in 12th, is Birmingham, and things are a lot brighter in Birmingham at the moment.
Bright blue.
Where new owners are in. We have a really exciting manager in the form of John Eustace, who I think showed over the course of last season that he is, with a pretty poor squad, that he's someone who can get a team playing fair football, maybe get the team to overperform. I think now we are going to see what he's really made of, because I love the recruitment drive that they've had. Dion Sanderson signs on a permanent, having spent the last season there on loan. Two really ultra-aggressive attacking wing-backs come in Lee Buchanan and Ethan Laird. I know that Laird's had a couple of poor seasons. I think maybe, certainly the QPR loan wasn't the ideal place for him to be for his progression last season. Lee Buchanan played 25 odd games for Werder Bremen in the Bundesliga last season. Two guys there with bags of ability, bags of athleticism, who'll be on either flank. Hearing great things about Koji Mayoshi, who comes in from Royal Antwerp, a Japanese attacking midfielder. Christian Bielik signs on permanent, having spent having had a loan there last season. Siriki Dembele, who's moved to Bournemouth, came at the worst time for him, where they got promoted to the Premier League and he wasn't really featuring, but we know how good he can be. Having spent a long time not tearing my hair out, but just being pretty negative about Birmingham and the players they had at their disposal and the way they look to operate as a club, it's all changed now. This is turning into Vibes FC, and I'm absolutely all here for it. Tyler Roberts up front as well, or in a 10 role, I think could be much better in this kind of environment where he is more the main man rather than a rotation signing. I'm really keen to see how this goes. Yeah, they lost Tahit Chong to Luton, which is a bit of a blow, but I think if this is the blueprint and there's another month to go the window, then we're going to see more ballers come in, and I can't wait to see how it goes.
On top of that, they've got young talent that hopefully they can find a spot for. Jordan James, of course, but possibly even more exciting, in my opinion, would be George Hall, who plays for England under-19s with some incredibly talented players from elite academies and always holds his own and actually stands out quite a bit. So maybe the loss of Chong isn't ideal. Maybe there's some minutes for George Hall in attacking midfield or wide roles there. I'm all in as well on the new Blues. Get me to St Andrews at some point, please. Not far from Birmingham, West Bromwich. We've got West Bromwich Albion in 11th. Tough team to place, really, and I'll try and explain why. Off the field, they're in dire straits. You could use some other phrases. One NTT20 squad member who's a Baggies fan reckons they're essentially on life support. Parachute payments ran out this summer for West Brom. The wage bill is too high. You can see that in what they've done this summer, shifting some high earners. Selling Dara O'Shea in particular will impact the team, and with only one addition, that's Jeremy Sarmiento, talented youngster on loan from Brighton. Haven't been able to make any permanent signings, or just haven't made any permanent signings yet, because of the situation off the field. The Chinese consortium that bought the club in 2016 are relatively absent, I think would probably be a generous way of putting it. Ron Gourlay was CEO. He's resigned. He's left. It's very concerning. And from what I understand, the inference is that from probably next season onwards, unless they're able to find a buyer and sell the club, the very future and existence of the club is under threat. But for this season, if they are able to operate as a football team, and if they are able to keep a manager in Carlos Corberán that I hold in incredibly high regard, and if they are able to keep the majority of the squad that they have in place, I think they have an excellent manager for the level that can coach teams, particularly out of possession, to be absolutely exceptional at Championship level. Good when defending their own box, but very good out of possession, setting pressing traps, very difficult to play through and score against. If Corberan is able to handle or set aside off-field noise and issues and just do what he does with this squad, I still think the quality, certainly in the starting 11, is there, if not maybe in terms of depth, to pick up quite a lot of points. You've got Jed Wallace, you've got John Swift, Sarmiento and Diangana. Looking a little light up top with Brandon Thomas Asante, the only fit striker, with DK having picked up yet another injury. Really strong-looking centre midfield in my eyes, with Mollenby, with Mowat, with OK Yokoshlu. I think that West Brom will be highly competitive, but it is also certainly a team where I get the sense they're on a downwards trajectory because of what's happening off the field, and that absolutely has to be sorted. Much more important than anything that happens on the field. We've got West Brom in 11th. Find it pretty hard to pitch them, to be quite honest, but that's where we've landed. Above them, George, a big riser.
Yeah, 10th for Bristol City.
I say big riser. Finished 14th last season.
4 places.
Hello.
Do that again next season in the playoffs. Yeah, it's mad to think back. What was it, February, when there was incredible negativity around Ashton Gate. Nigel Pearson was not particularly popular around the club. It felt like maybe this was drifting towards its natural conclusion. And then just a switch from 5 at the back to 4 at the back was pretty good. And that seemed to do the trick in the back end of the season. And then suddenly they finished the campaign really well. And again, pre-season doesn't matter, but they are unbeaten in their pre-season, which has got Bristol City fans incredibly excited. And what's that? I saw when they went to Portsmouth a couple of days ago. Is that Alex Scott playing at 10 for Bristol City now?
Okay.
Is this happening?
Good player.
Is he possibly going to stay? Like, he's been linked to Wolves aggressively both in January and then this summer as well. But anyone who's been following the Wolves story knows that Lopetegui, their manager, is getting very frustrated with the inability to get transfers done. It feels like Scott is one of those, and maybe there's a chance, who knows, that he could still be at the club past the end of the window. It feels unlikely. You can't guarantee it, but there's certainly some thinking now, when it looked like it was done, that he'll be leaving. It looks, for now at least, like he'll be starting the season playing for Bristol City, which is massive, and there's no reason why I think this coming season he shouldn't be not just a standout young player, but a standout player in the whole division. The addition of Jason Knight I really like, adding some energy and some versatility into the side. They brought in Rob Dickey, who I think will be a very good defensive partner for Rob Atkinson, the two Robs. And they're stacked in at centre-back as well with Viner and then Naismith, and they brought in Ross McCrory as well, who can either play as a centre-back or in holding midfield. So we've known for a long time that Bristol City have a range of options up front. That is still the case now with Cornick, Wells, Bell, Conway, Mehmeti and Vyman and Sykes. I mean, it's just the rotation you can do between those guys, and that front three is huge. And now they've added to it some defensive depth, some solidity and some energy and Knight. There's, Nigel Pearson, we know when he gets his team, can be incredibly effective. And I do wonder if Bristol City could be a dark horse in this season's championship. I know their fans are very excited. Good also to see that Nigel Pearson was already complaining about not getting any penalties in their pre-season friendly against Portsmouth, saying the season hasn't even started yet and refs aren't giving us penalties.
It's part of the country-wide conspiracy against Bristol City.
That's what I thought.
Inside the penalty area. Above them, we've got Stoke City, who this is a bit of a rise, actually. Finished 16th last season. We've got them 9th this time around. They've got loads of players that I think could be part of a good team. And the best news of all is that I really like Alex Neil. And I have been dying on an Alex Neil hill for some time. I think he's an excellent manager. I really, really do. Particularly when he gets buy-in from a group of players. And I hope that that's what he'll get from this group of Stoke players. I think he's a brilliant out-of-possession coach in particular. I think teams hate playing against Alex Neil teams when they're at their best. And I think with a group of quality players motivated to play well and with a settled system, there is a lot of potential in this team and in attack. Now, would another centre-back or two go amiss? No. I would like to see a little bit more depth in that area of the pitch. But tons of options in midfield and up top. Some quite exciting signings, some quite odd signings, and some signings where, high ceiling, low floor kind of stuff. You've got Wesley, the Aston Villa striker.
Aston Villa's record signing for a time.
Fair to say he's had a very, very bad few years, both when he's been injured, but also even when he's not been injured. Hasn't looked like the player Villa wanted when they signed him, and he's got a short-term 1-year deal with Stoke. So low risk, I guess. I'm not expecting a huge amount. I happen to think that Jacob Brown is a good player. I happen to think that with him, with Tyrese Campbell, certainly there's already some goals in that front line. They've also very particularly added basically wide attacking threat in the form of Chiquinho from Wolves, who'd broken into their first team a little bit 2 years ago before a big injury, with Ryan Maie, that's Mmaee,
Maie,
from Ferencvaros, who looks like quite an interesting profile. And then others like Ben Pearson, who is exactly what you want in an Alex Neil midfield. I think... Well, I saw them play well for a period last season, only a shortish period, and I saw the future, basically, the dream of what it could look like, and I want the dream to become reality. Alex Neil and Stoke this season. 9th place finish, please.
In 8th, we've got Coventry City, who were so unlucky, well, not unlucky, but came so close to returning to the Premier League at Wembley when being beaten by Luton Town, and that was an incredible season. The latest addition to what has been an unbelievable time in charge for Mark Robins since taking him from League Two. And normally you would hope that off the back of a decent playoff campaign, in a similar way to Luton last season, maybe they could build on that and go one better and force their way into the Premier League. But it's going to be incredibly hard for them to do so because they've lost the main man, the Gyok up front, 17 and 21 goals in the last 2 seasons. An incredible signing from them, an all-action centre-forward who did a hell of a lot more than just score goals. He has moved on to Sporting, will be playing European football next season. And if we knew sitting here right now that Gus Harmer was definitely staying, I think there's a chance we'd have them higher than 8th. That is how highly we rate him. He is transformative to the side. His ball-playing ability, his pressing ability, the way that he can get them attacking on the counter is just massive to how they play. But at this moment in time, judging by Mark Robins' quotes, they're still pretty sure he's not going to sign a new contract. And therefore, if anyone meets what they want for him, given his contract is up next year, he will be moving on. And that is a really hard gap to fill. There are some additions to like. It's impressive when you see the financial outlay of their new owner, Doug King, in terms of going out and getting Ellis Sims for up to £8 million, a signing I really like. A very different profile, I'd say, to Gyökeres, who's incredibly all action. I think Sims is somebody who's a clever player who can hold the ball up a bit, who has that eye for goal, who we've mainly seen playing in a 2. So I do wonder, normally Robins would rotate between a 2 and a lone striker, with Gyök probably excelling when playing up front on his own. I do wonder if we'll see Godden and Sims as a duo more often, or possibly O'Hare and Sims, with O'Hare coming back from injury hopefully in the next couple of months. Milan van Ewijk is another one, a left back who they've signed from Heerenveen. Oh, right back, sorry, they signed from Heerenveen, who, again, the financial outlay for that seems to be £2 or £3 million. We don't know much about him. Jada Silva, a really solid option at left back. So they've made some decent additions. It's just, and have to be a massive fan of Robins and the work that he's doing there, and respect them immensely. But given the loss of Gyökeres, and if we are assuming they're going to lose Harmer too, it would be bold to think that they can improve on what they did last season.
One thing could be fairly clear, that's Cov will improve over the course of the season, because Robins is such a quality operator and such a good problem solver. And over the years, we've seen that so many times, that whatever cards he's dealt and whatever a team looks like at the start of the season, he generally gets to grips with it, moulds it into something else, and then cracks on from there. So excited about that. We've got Millwall above them. Millwall in 7th spot, just missing out on the playoffs, just like they did last season. I'd like to get them into the top 6 in the dream world, because I have a huge amount of respect for the way that Millwall operate. A big part of that was the chairman, John Berylson, whose ownership of the club, to my eyes, has been pretty impeccable for quite some time now, and someone that was highly appreciated by Millwall fans, everyone involved with Millwall, and I think, as far as I could tell, basically everyone that ever came across John Berylson. So the death of Mr. Berylson in early July rocked the club, and everyone that knew him. We'd certainly want to send commiserations to the club and to all of those connected to Millwall and those who knew John Berylson. He leaves a club in fantastic shape because of his stewardship of it. And it's a club who have been able to drop, say, £2 million on a new signing. And that's brought them players like Zian Fleming last year. A massive credit to the scouting team for identifying the talent, for bringing it in. And Fleming will either stay and have another big impact on this team, or he will go, as is somewhat rumoured, and make the club a very, very large profit. This summer, it's Kevin Nisbet, striker from Hibs, who has at times had some really good goal-scoring streaks in Scotland, and Casper De Norre, a midfielder from Belgium. They've also signed Wes Harding, who I think is a good fit for Millwall, and Joe Bryan as well is something of an eye-catching signing to play down the left side. In Gary Rowett, they have one of the longest-standing managers in the league. There'll be some people who would be concerned that could lend itself to a bit of staleness at some point, but I personally consider Rowett to be one of the team's strengths. There's a youngster to look out for as well, Romain Esse, E-S-S-E, not quite Eze, but Esse. And I'm really, really excited, hopefully, to see him get some proper development minutes and possibly show off some serious potential. But overall, for me, I think Millwall looks stronger than last season. So there's no particular footballing or player squad reason why I'd predict a big drop-off. And as discussed, I'm not worried as much as some people seem to be about any sort of staleness around Gary Rowett. I think he's a very, very strong, safe pair of hands with a repeatable style that suits this division pretty well. So Millwall in 7th. Into the top 6, George. Into the top 6 we go.
Yeah, next up is Middlesbrough, who I know a lot of people think could be title challengers. And you know, Michael Carrick came in last season and took a club who were flirting with relegation and did incredibly to take them as close briefly to Sheffield United as they did, and look for a time like there might be a team to challenge the top two. They eventually fell quite a long way short of that. I think we have to say there was a definite drop-off in results towards the back end of the season. Throughout the campaign and throughout the good form, there was an alarming amount of shots being conceded, but their attacking play was totally and utterly irresistible. And you know what Carrick did with Chuba Akpom, you know, turning a guy who looked like he was probably going to wind down his contract there, or at least, you know, he'd just come off the back of a loan to Greece, and turn him into the Championship top goal scorer, playing as a number 10 rather than an out-and-out striker, was incredible. The addition of Cameron Archer in January added a whole new dimension. The tactical risks that we saw Carrick take that worked were incredibly impressive. You know, Marcus Force being always a proper penalty box striker, being deployed out wide right, you know, pushing Giles forward. It all worked, and it felt like Carrick gets it. And I don't deny that they will be impressive again. Concerns now, because there have to be some, otherwise we'd have them in the top 3. Like Chuba Akpom hasn't featured at all in pre-season. He is said to be injured. I think there have to be, as ever, when a player is, you know, a high-achieving player from the season before is injured throughout pre-season, you have to wonder, and I know that he sustained the injury at the back end of the campaign, but there are clubs that are interested. You cannot just be convinced that he will be there next season. I also think when a 27-year-old player suddenly has a breakout season and an incredible purple patch, you cannot also be sure that they're going to do it again. So I would have concerns on both lines there. Archer looks like he'll be staying at Villa this season, so hasn't come back. I think they need to replace him. Otherwise, the attack looks a little bit less potent, although Morgan Rogers comes in, who we've seen in League One before be very effective. He struggled in his last couple of loans at a Championship level at Blackpool and at Bournemouth. Looking at the players they brought in, it's been quite a weird transfer strategy, I'd say. A lot of young players, not much proven quality. The return of Martin Pajero could be exciting after he's come back from Boca Juniors. But yeah, it kind of feels to me that they haven't necessarily gone for it. Carrick is happy with what he's got, and they've added a sprinkling of youth in order to add some depth. Seny Dieng comes in after Zach Steffen returned from his loan. Dieng had a really poor season by his standards last season. So I don't think it's as simple as they were really good under Carrick last season, so they're going to be really good again. I have concerns. I'm sure they will be a team that are challenging for promotion in some guys, whether that's the playoffs or the automatics. I just think there's a fair gap between them and some others in the league.
In fifth, we've got a playoff team from last year returning to them, and that is Sunderland. Oh, there's so much to be excited about here, and I am fully bought in. This is a club that has very tangible upwards momentum, incredibly positive energy in a way that I think is pretty powerful. It is also a club who has a group of people running it with such a clear idea of how they are going to go about doing so over the next few years. It is very extreme in so many ways. They have doubled down on a recruitment policy that involves finding young talent, particularly from outside of England, a recruitment process that we sort of recognise from having been popularised by Brentford now some years ago in the Championship, but not many teams have had the bravery to spend money, spend transfer fees on players that are both young and unproven and coming from other leagues where many clubs think it's too much of a risk and that it's hard to know how it translates to the Championship. Their signings this summer, Jensen Seelt and Triantis, are both 20-year-old centre-backs. Mayenda, an 18-year-old striker, picked up an injury almost immediately. Emir, the only fit striker heading into the season, is a 19-year-old from Benfica's youth system. Bradley Dack has joined. It's almost like Tony Mowbray's like, please, just give me Bradley. Buy the wonder kids I've never heard of, but give me Bradley, will you? And then, of course, Job Bellingham joins as well, the midfielder, younger brother of Jude Bellingham. There's so much to be excited about. This is a young, skillful, vibrant attacking team. They've got a manager who is the manager you'd most want to be your uncle in Tony Mowbray, and I think that's a great person to lead a team of this profile. There are so many players that could, and emphasis on could, take the leap and look like absolute wonder kids. In particular, Pierre Ekwa, whose performances in the last month of the season massively caught the eye and make me very, very excited for what he could do this season. Yes, Amad Diallo was their star attacker in many ways last season, although Jack Clark may have something to say about that. He's gone back to Manchester United. They've still got Roberts and Clark and Pritchard. They've added a ton more players across the field. I now think the squad looks fairly well balanced, which wasn't always the case last season. I think they've plugged some of the gaps pretty well. The concerns would be defensively. They just weren't a particularly good defensive team last season, but they were so good going forward. They turned games into shootouts, and they had so much quality that generally they were on the right side of them. So I think it's fair to say we're pretty excited about what Sunderland are bringing to the Championship table this season. We've got them finishing in the playoffs once again. George above them, there's only 4 spots left, and there's 3 teams coming down from the Prem. Here's the first of them in 4th.
Yeah, in 4th it's Leicester, who are favourites to win the Championship with the Betfair Sportsbook at 4-1. Now, of all the relegated sides, Leicester's the one which is probably the hardest to really grasp, because we know a fair bit about the managers taking over at Southampton and at Leeds. With Enzo Maresca, it is a beautiful narrative, but until we actually see it on the pitch in competitive games, it's hard to really throw your weight behind it. We know that Maresca has worked under Pep Guardiola at Manchester City. We know that he's very good friends with Roberto De Zerbi. All this stuff sounds lovely, but it doesn't inherently make you a good football manager. And you only have to look at Mikel Arteta, who is a very good football manager, to realise that sometimes these things can take time. And that is the interesting part that we do know from Maresca, is that he was manager at Parma a couple of years ago, where he came in May. Parma in Serie B had a star-studded squad, including Buffon, of all people. And he was given a 3-year deal and was sacked in November, having picked up, I think it was 17 or 18 points from 13 games. And he was very clear after he was sacked, in the quotes kind of saying that he needed more time. This is a process. And for that reason, I think it's quite harsh to just assume that Maresca is going to come in at Leicester and turn them into, a Bielsa in Leeds or a company Burnley, because the squad itself has been gutted of a lot of its talent already. We've seen Maddison and Barnes go. I'm not convinced there is, right now from where I'm sitting, I'm fully aware that there are more players set to leave Southampton and Leeds. I think Leicester's squad is the worst of the 3 in terms of players that are still there. I don't like the additions they've made so far. I think going out and signing top tier players whose career is on a downward trajectory is not the way to go about building a squad to win the Championship. Conor Coady comes in, having lost his place at Wolves, having gone on loan to Everton, where he struggled to maintain his place at Everton narrowly avoiding relegation and then rejecting their option to buy him. To go out and spend £7.5 million on a very specific type of centre-back as well, age 30, who in my mind hasn't really been playing, this is Premier League money and Premier League wages and hasn't really shown it for a long time. I'm sure he's a lovely guy and can get people fired up in a dressing room, but I'm not sure that's the best way to spend your money. Harry Winks, who spent last season on loan at Sampdoria, again, didn't really stand out. Sampdoria relegated from Serie A last season. Again, like high outlay in terms of bringing him in. I'm not sure it's the right way to go. There's no denying, you look at their striking options, it's currently Iheanacho, Daka and Vardy. You think one of those guys should be able to find some goals at a Championship level. Dewsbury Hall is clearly a player that I don't think should be playing in the Championship, but Ndidi the same. Ricardo Pereira's had a very good pre-season playing in midfield. There are good players here, and that's why we have them fourth. But one of two things happens in my mind. Either this goes well, and they're a good side, and the process works. It might take some time, and they're a good side, in which case I think fourth is a fair place to predict them. Or it doesn't go well, and Maresca is sacked like he was at Parma. They bring someone else in, and they probably become upwardly mobile again. They're going to be trying to... I'd be amazed if they do a Watford or a Norwich. But I think if you are fully behind and you fully believe and you're backing them at 4-1 to win the league, I just think there's a lot of guesswork going on.
Let's just put our tactics nerds head on and get excited for the potential for a manager that has worked under Pep Guardiola, worked under Sampaoli, and has been best mates with Roberto De Zerbi for coming up to 30 years, who has been trialling some incredibly lively tactics in pre-season, who I hope has signed, for example, Conor Coady and Harry Winks for very specific roles. Coady as a sort of libero. I kind of hate that I use that word, but it's probably the best way to describe it. Someone who's going to start all of the attacks from deep and have the quality to do so, and hopefully can be hidden a little bit defensively where sometimes he does struggle. And then Harry Winks basically being the same sort of player with a similar sort of role, but just 15 yards further up the pitch, a kind of Josh Cullen-esque role, making sure that he's recycling, keeping the ball under pressure, drawing the press, and then trying to play through into players like Dewsbury Hall playing ahead of him. I think there's a lot to be excited about, but I can't argue with some of your concerns, and that's why we have them in fourth place. In third, we got a team that finished second in League One last season, Ipswich Town, back in the Championship after a couple of years in League One, and we are pretty in love with Ipswich Town, and we're pretty in love with how strong we perceive them to be heading into a Championship campaign. Kieran McKenna in charge had 6 months or so to get his feet under the table and start implementing a certain style of play. We certainly liked what we saw in his first 6 months in the 21-22 season, and even we probably couldn't have expected what we saw last season. With the caveat that Ipswich came second, they did not finish higher than Plymouth Argyle. They still put together one of the best seasons I can ever remember from a team at that level. A plus 66 goal difference in League One, so more than a goal better per game than their opposition in a sport where there's only generally about 2.5 goals a game is pretty dominant. They took 10 shots more per game than their opposition. For reference, the dominant Burnley team in the Championship took 5 shots more than their opponents per game, and that's considered quite a lot. For me, this is just a few bits of proof of Ipswich's dominance and the level that they were playing at. It's true that they had, in particular, one stretch where they lost their shooting boots, where they were frustrated in front of goal and they didn't finish chances and they dropped points. Outside of that, they were simply sensational. Their squad is strong. It's been built really well in the last 3 windows or so. I think that they have players for every role and position. I think that McKenna is such a good tactician that when I talk about roles and positions, it can sometimes be subtly changed and tweaked in-game without the team losing any sort of shape or quality. And I think they'll come flying out the traps, basically. I also think that teams will play differently against them, particularly to start the season. Unlike League One teams who, for the most part, played possum, sat back, and sort of closed their eyes and hoped for the best. I don't think Championship clubs will approach games against Ipswich in that way, and I think that's a good thing for them. I think it gives them more ability to play into space where they can be really good in transition attacks with the likes of Wes Burns and George Hurst, with Chaplin arriving late and picking up those awkward spots and being such a good finisher. I really think that could actually suit them rather than hinder them, the fact that they're playing at a higher level. Clearly, I'm confident. There is such confidence and bullishness coming from within this club. There's a chance it's too much and it could lead to complacency, but I'm taking it as a massive positive.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think they could easily do the back-to-back promotions, which would be an incredible story. You know, you look at the underlying numbers they've got compared to other League One sides, and it's mind-blowing. And you also consider, if you look at Ipswich last season in cup competitions as well, it's quite a good barometer to show how they were, how they were basically perceived. Where they played against, I think, Rotherham. They beat Rotherham in the FA Cup last season and were heavy favourites in that game up against Championship opposition. They went up against Burnley and held Burnley at home 0-0 and were probably the better side in that game. And then were beaten by Burnley away from home in the replay. They went toe to toe there, and they gave Burnley a way better game in both of them than we saw most Championship sides last season. They were, in my opinion, a top half Championship side last season, and they're entitled to step up again. Her signing full time is a massive positive. So, yeah, I know it'll probably ruffle some feathers in places, and people will be surprised and will wonder how a team that came second in League One last season can come third. But it wouldn't even surprise me if Ipswich came in first or second.
In second, Southampton. Southampton back in the league for the first time since 2011-2012. It's not that long ago. They were considered one of the sort of model Premier League clubs, and now they're having to remodel back down in the champ. They were the worst of the three relegated teams last season by away, and there's quite a lot to unpack when trying to work out what Southampton will be like under Russell Martin. So, George, why do we have them in second?
Various reasons. I think, again, it's what I said about Leicester, I think rings true here, where Martin is very much a process manager, and I think there may be a chance it might take some time for his message to get across to the Southampton squad. But unlike what we were talking about with Leicester in terms of the playing squad, right now, and I think we are fully aware that they are going to lose more players, but on the eve of the season, their team yesterday in a pre-season friendly included Bazunu in goal, Livramento at left back. It had Ward-Prowse in central midfield, Alcaraz as well, Nathan Teller, one of the standout players last season in the Championship, Adam Armstrong, previously a prolific goal scorer at this level too. Lavia was on the bench, Walker Peters was on the bench. A lot of these guys are going to leave, and we know that. But they're, unlike Leicester, where one or two have been picked off, the amount of quality running through the Southampton side is massive. Crucially with them as well, unlike other sides necessarily, is that they seemed better prepared for relegation, where Jason Wilcox, their new director of football or sporting director, was appointed from Manchester City soon after the season ended. He was the one charged with appointing a manager. He went after Russell Martin, despite how long it took to get it signed off, was obviously done very early as well. If you look at their recruitment in January, with Alcaraz coming in amongst others, they, to me, are a side that I would trust to spend the money that they get for Ward-Prowse, for Lavia, which is going to be probably north of 100 million once they get all the sales done. Walker Peters as well, who just went out yesterday. Salisu, who's gone to Monaco for 15 million. Livramento, who's rumoured to be going back to the Premier League for kind of 20 plus. I trust them to spend that money. With Leicester, given who they've spent it on, the reasons I mentioned, I'm not so sure. So it might be a work in progress, but I do think the squad is very good. And crucially, I've got massive faith in Russell Martin, who, I know that he hasn't necessarily achieved anything yet in his career. He's taken an MK Dons side to mid-table. He's taken a Swansea side to mid-table. But this is the first time, in my mind, he's been given a squad that is capable of challenging for promotion. Nowhere to hide here. It's going to be interesting to see how he gets on. But I've seen enough, I think, to suggest that he will be able to form a team worthy of automatic promotion in the upcoming campaign, and I'm looking forward to seeing it.
We picked the last four winners of the Championship on our 1-24s. This year we're picking Leeds United. Daniel Farke's in charge. They've gone through a fairly protracted ownership change, a new takeover that got ratified a couple of weeks ago. On the outside, George. It doesn't look like they've done a ton of work in terms of recruitment, and that always worries people. That always concerns people when they don't see lots of transfers being made. We're not concerned. We've got them number one. Talk me through it.
Yeah, so Daniel Farke in. Daniel Farke has won this league twice, and you said to me yesterday when we were talking through this, the fact, that it feels like he's less tactically innovative, possibly, well, certainly than Russell Martin, and we'll see with Enzo Maresca, but by the looks of it, he is. I think that is maybe, short-term at least, a positive, where any teething issues that I'm talking about, the processes that go on with certainly Manning ball and probably Maresca ball too, that might create a little bit of time before this gets up and running. I don't think will be the case with Leeds. Otherwise, the key here for me is that Leeds' relegation for me was a process of the wrong recruitment at the wrong time. Jorginho Rutter is a case of that, where needing to ward off relegation, they spent £30 million on a striker that fans were then told wasn't ready for first team football. What that means is that they have a lot of players who are young, talented, destined for the top level players who probably aren't going to be picked off this summer, coupled with a new ownership group who seem intent on retaining some of those players. Willy Gnonto, if he is there this season, will be one of the standout players in the Championship in the EFL this season, possibly the standout. Already rejecting bids from Everton for his services, seemingly with no desire to let him go. To add to that, you've got Somerville, Sinisterra. They've already added Ampadu, which I think is a really shrewd signing. I think he's going to play holding midfield for them rather than centre-back, somebody who's going to distribute the ball really well. And the aforementioned Rutter, who, again, you've got a £30 million striker playing up front. There's no way he's going to be going anywhere because they're not going to recoup that fee. Scored 8 goals when he was 19 in the Bundesliga. So it's kind of the perfect crime where almost poor recruitment has meant that, in my eyes at least, if you look at the profile of the Norwich side that went up under Farke, the Burnley side from last season, it's this profile of young, technically gifted players who are able to develop within the Championship rather than necessarily going into a Premier League side where they're under the cosh the whole time and can't really get a foothold in the game. They still have Liam Cooper at centre-back, Luke Ayling at full-back. These are players who have won this league already before. They're playing, as we record, they're playing a pre-season friendly against Hearts.
Didn't want to tell you, but Rutter picked up a knock.
Okay.
He's hurt his rib?
Well, they got Bamford there and said Bamford Island is back.
Come on, Bamford Island.
Haven't even mentioned, you got Joe Gelhardt there playing as either as a tenor up front. It's just it's almost not good enough compared to Southampton and Leicester to have all of their key players poached, and an ownership group have already shown they're willing to open the wallet and spend on Ampadu. I'm actually fairly bullish that Leeds should be able to hit the ground running here, and I think a best set to under a manager who we know is capable of building a dominant side at a Championship level. I think Leeds should be favourites to win the league. They're not at the moment, but I think they should be.
It's incredible working, and I'm excited. I'm really excited to have Leeds at the top of our 1-24s. I find the top of the Championship so difficult. I found it one of those leagues this year where being able to pick holes, and holes that you consider to be kind of big holes, significant holes, easier than finding something to be super bullish about. The good news is that you did not struggle with that you very rarely struggle with that, and you're coming off the back of a sensational Burnley pick, which, if you look at the replies to our tweet about the 1-24s last year, you'll see quite a lot of people seeming quite disgusted. So just a word of warning if you've got the Twitter fingers out since you heard us say Leeds United in number 1, but that's it. We've got Leeds top of our 1-24s.
Yeah, looking at the prices, Leeds are 11-2 second favourites to win the league. Leicester are 4-1 favourites. Southampton 15-2 third favourites. Ipswich, for those who are shocked that we had them in third, are fourth favourites at 12-1. So that goes to show there. For a top 2 finish, Leeds 100-30, Southampton 4-1, Ipswich 5-1, and in terms of a top 6 finish, Borough are 5-4, Ipswich 6-4, Sunderland, who are 100-30, big price there, and Leicester, who are 1-2, so 2 on Leicester finish in the top 6.
That's it. Finally, we can stop preparing, stop researching. We can sit back and watch opening weekend of the EFL. So excited to be covering this league and League One and League Two this season for you guys, twice a week on the podcast and in so many other places as well. Make sure you listen to the League One and League Two 1 to 24s. Please do share them online. It makes a massive difference for us. It's a big week for us in order to try and reach new people, new listeners, and try and convert some of the Premier League lot into EFL lovers. Thanks to Betfair for their support of this podcast, both this season and the previous 2 years as well, heading into year 3 with Betfair as sponsors of Not the Top 20. And if you've enjoyed this, if you enjoy the work put into our 1 to 24 podcasts, then you can do us a favour and head to NTT20.com. The EFL Newsletter by NTT20 is going to be a good addition to your life as an EFL enthusiast. I absolutely guarantee it. Stick your email in the box. Start off with a free subscription if you like, and you'll get served up some content about once a week, a couple of times a month, or invest at the ground floor. Get yourself an early bird discount, annual subscription, and join us for a season's worth of excellent written content. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy the start of the season and go well.